Imagine you've lost everything, your home, your job, your hearing, and the person you love. Now imagine that after all that, you're humiliated because you mopped the floors. But it's that dirty rag that hides a secret that could turn the fate of the entire company upside down. Want to know how a homeless cleaning lady became a director and got her voice back? Then watch to the end. This story will change your perception of the power of the human spirit. When Brian Callahan stepped into his new role as regional office manager at a mid-sized logistics firm in suburban Ohio, he wasted no time establishing his dominance. His first major decision: a sweeping pay cut across the board, excluding his own, of course. In fact, Brian gave himself a small bump, justifying it as executive adjustment. Now, imagine showing up to work on Monday and finding out your salary just shrank, while the new guy in charge gets a raise. What would you do? Unsurprisingly, chaos erupted. Nearly half the staff quit within 48 hours. Those who remained did so not out of loyalty or optimism, but because they had rent to pay and no backup plan. Brian, however, seemed to take this as a win. He strutted around the office like he owned the building, treating the remaining staff like disposable tools. "We trimmed the fat," he would say at morning briefings. "Now we're lean, efficient, and ready to grow." But that so-called efficiency came with a cost. With fewer people and no drop in workload, employees were burning out fast. Folks were working double shifts, staying late into the night, weekends blurred into weekdays, and personal time became a thing of the past. Even the janitorial staff wasn't spared. There used to be a kind older lady named Dolores who cleaned the floors and made sure everything sparkled. Brian slashed her hours and cut her pay in half. Within a week, she was gone. Finding a replacement? That became a daily comedy of errors. The HR director, a patient woman named Linda Myers, pleaded with Brian every morning. "We can't get anyone to mop floors for minimum wage in this economy. We need to raise the offer." But Brian wouldn't budge. Instead, he used the dirty floors as ammunition in staff meetings. "Why does this place look like a barn?" he would bark. "Does nobody take pride in their environment anymore?" Truth be told, the place was a mess. Dust coated the baseboards. The break room smelled like sour milk. Nobody had touched the bathrooms in days. The staff, too scared or too tired to complain, just kept their heads down. And Linda, poor Linda, she swallowed her pride and Brian's tantrums, knowing full well that at her age, starting over somewhere else would be a battle. Then came one particularly tense Tuesday morning. The weekly meeting was in full swing. Everyone silent as Brian ranted about overflowing trash bins and smudged windows. He waved his coffee mug at Linda. "Still no janitor? Seriously? How hard is it to hire someone who knows how to push a mop? We're a reputable firm. People should be lining up to work here." At that moment, he drifted toward the large office window, mug in hand. He stopped abruptly, eyes narrowing at something outside. Everyone turned their heads, trying to spot what had caught his attention. Down near the dumpsters, a slender woman in ragged clothing was carefully stacking flattened cardboard boxes. Her movements were precise, almost graceful. Her clothes, though obviously worn, were tidy. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. Brian smirked. "Watch and learn, rookies," he muttered to the room before flinging the window open. "Hey," he called out. "You. Yeah, you with the boxes, come up here. I've got a job offer that might interest you." But the woman didn't even flinch. She continued organizing the boxes, paying him no mind. Brian frowned. Was she ignoring him? "I said, do you want to earn some cash? Come on. I'm talking to you." Still, she remained focused on her task. Now irritated, Brian turned to Linda. "Get security. Bring her up here. She wants a job, fine. We'll give her one." Moments later, a security guard escorted the woman into the boardroom. And this, dear listeners, is where the story takes a turn. She was around 29, maybe 30. Up close, she didn't resemble the down-and-out stereotype many might have assumed. Her clothes, while simple, were clean. Her hands looked like they had not seen dirt in hours. Her hair was neatly combed, and her eyes, although cautious, held a quiet resilience. It became clear very quickly that she was deaf. She wore a hearing aid, but it was old and probably broken. She didn't respond to their questions at first, just looked between the faces in the room, confused but calm. Linda, being the empathetic soul she was, stepped forward and scribbled a note on a piece of paper. She held it up to the young woman. "Would you like to work here?" The woman read the note, then paused. She looked around, assessing the tension in the room, the hostile body language, and finally, the smug expression on Brian's face. She reached for a pen and wrote beneath Linda's note, "What kind of work?" Now here's where I want to pause and ask you, the listener. If you were in her shoes, standing in a strange building surrounded by strangers, all because a loud man in a suit yelled out a window at you, would you trust him? Would you accept that job? Because what she did next surprised everyone. Lauren tied her hair into a simple knot and straightened her oversized hoodie. Her clothes might have looked poor, but they were clean, neatly washed and worn with quiet dignity. Sure, her jeans were a bit too baggy, and the hoodie hung off her shoulders like it belonged to someone else. But there was no smell, no grime, and nothing that said hopeless, just a woman trying to survive. Linda Myers, the human resources director who'd been standing silently beside the new manager, remembered in that moment that deaf people could often read lips. She began to pronounce each word slowly, articulating carefully, "Can you understand me?" Lauren watched Linda's mouth and gave a slight nod. "You need a job? It's simple office cleaning." Linda finished, her voice low and gentle. Lauren stood still for a few long seconds, her eyes scanning the room, pausing on each face. Then she nodded again, quietly accepting the offer. Brian Callahan clapped his hands once with smug satisfaction. "You see," he barked, spinning to face Linda. "What was that you said about hiring being hard? Maybe you just forgot how to do your job. There's a lesson for you. Turns out even a nobody off the street is willing to work for pennies." He grinned cruelly and added, "Before you tell her anything about pay, maybe trim it down a bit more." But then Brian saw Linda's expression shift, stern, almost maternal, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his smug face. Maybe he realized he had pushed too far. Even a desperate person wouldn't stick around for that kind of cruelty. So he dropped the idea. Lauren began working the very next day. She was always early, sometimes arriving an hour before her shift started. With incredible focus and quiet determination, she scrubbed, wiped, polished, and dusted every corner of that office. Within a week, the place looked brand new. The floors shined. The kitchen no longer smelled like forgotten leftovers. Desks gleamed, windows sparkled, and even the stubborn grime in the break room microwave had vanished. But despite the transformation, Lauren received little thanks. Her co-workers treated her with thinly veiled disdain. When they weren't ignoring her entirely, they mocked her behind her back, laughing openly because they assumed she couldn't hear. Her hearing aid, an old plastic model held together with tape, barely worked. It squeaked and buzzed but rarely picked up enough to catch a full sentence. Still, Lauren wasn't deaf to cruelty. She caught enough of the whispers, the sneers, the jokes, and she said nothing. She had endured far worse in life. This was just another storm. At the end of each long day, Lauren returned to her humble haven on the outskirts of town. Her home was little more than an abandoned shack, its paint faded, its roof patched with tarps. But to her, it was a sanctuary, and she was never alone. Inside, she cared for a ragtag family of strays. 3 curious kittens, a wise old cat, 2 scruffy dogs, and even a wounded parrot with a splinted leg. These animals, rescued from alleys and parking lots, depended on her. And she, in turn, leaned on them for comfort. They were her peace, her purpose. No matter how cruel the world outside became, she always made sure her pets had food, even if it meant she went to bed with only bread and water. Their warm eyes and wagging tails made the insults and laughter at the office melt away. Linda, meanwhile, began to notice the difference. She admired Lauren's work ethic and how the building practically sparkled under her care. But even with the HR director's quiet approval, Brian Callahan remained unimpressed. It wasn't that Lauren did a bad job. If anything, he couldn't find a single thing to complain about. And that irritated him even more. Her silence unnerved him. Her calm, steady demeanor grated on his nerves. It was as if her very presence challenged his authority without saying a word. But something odd began happening. Slowly, the office culture started to shift. People who once laughed behind Lauren's back began to hesitate. They started noticing things. The books she read during lunch, the way she calmly observed everything around her, the occasional handwritten notes she left with insightful comments or solutions to overlooked problems. Despite her worn clothes and outsider status, Lauren was clearly intelligent, sharp, even wise. Some co-workers began to suspect she had been highly educated at some point in her life. Her comments, when she chose to share them, were quiet but cutting, thoughtful, unexpectedly profound. The idea began to circulate. Maybe Lauren wasn't just a desperate woman looking for scraps. Maybe she had once had a real life, one with purpose and dignity, before it all came crashing down. But Brian, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the change, doubled down. His morning meetings became aggressive lectures. He blamed everyone for falling numbers. Productivity had plummeted, and tension filled the air like static. Each week, more people were fired, sometimes 3 at once. Rumors began to swirl. Brian was going to be the last man standing. One poor soul even joked that soon Brian would be cleaning his own toilet. And people laughed, but nervously. Then came the twist. The company's founder and CEO, Mr. Nolan Avery, began visiting more frequently. This was the man who had built the business from scratch, who had watched this branch once flourish under better leadership. And now he was hearing whispers about chaos, decline, and morale at an all-time low. Brian, ever the manipulator, used Nolan's visits to put on a show. He barked out orders, plastered on smiles, tried to paint a picture of success. But Nolan saw through the act. He noticed how staff avoided eye contact. He saw their hunched shoulders, their anxious glances. He saw the tired faces and quiet resentment. The office might have looked clean on the surface, but beneath it, something had rotted. And so, during his final surprise visit, Nolan gathered everyone in the conference room and made an announcement. This office will undergo a complete review. Tomorrow, the building will be closed. Everyone, including management, will get a paid day off. What do you think he planned next? Would you have trusted that sudden kindness? Or would you have braced for the storm to follow? If you're watching this and still haven't clicked like, subscribed, or written what you think, do it now. What would you do if you were Lauren? Would you have survived everything she's been through? Support this story if you care. We want to know what you think. It could inspire someone who is on the brink. While the office staff enjoyed their unexpected paid day off, Nolan Avery, founder and CEO of the company, stayed behind with a quiet mission. What no one knew was that during their absence, Nolan had discreetly installed a series of hidden cameras throughout the office. They were synced directly to his personal laptop. He had no intention of using them for control, but rather for discovery. The truth of what had been happening behind his back was something he needed to uncover for himself. For weeks, Nolan watched. Every morning, he'd rise early, coffee in hand, and sit at his desk reviewing footage from the previous day. He studied employee behavior, office dynamics, and, more importantly, the strange undercurrent of tension that seemed to pulse through what had once been one of his most successful branches. Something was deeply wrong. And then, one ordinary afternoon, something extraordinary happened. During a quarterly review meeting, Nolan was handed a formal business strategy proposal. Thick packet, clean charts, concise financials, polished, executable. He flipped through it, eyebrows lifting in genuine surprise. He looked up at Brian Callahan, the regional manager. "Who prepared this?" he asked, holding the document midair. Brian hesitated, catching the interest in Nolan's tone. "I did, sir," he replied with false modesty. "I've been working late every night to perfect it. I really hope it aligns with your vision." Nolan gave a slight nod, but something felt off. The handwriting on the annotated notes wasn't Brian's. Nolan had seen Brian's scrawled, disorganized script before. This was clean, fluid, distinctly feminine. The tone of the analysis, measured, strategic, insightful, also didn't match Brian's usual chaotic thinking. That evening, Nolan scrolled through video recordings. Curiosity piqued, and what he discovered stopped him cold. There she was, Lauren, the quiet janitor who showed up early, stayed late, and never caused a stir. But instead of cleaning during those late-night hours, Nolan watched as she sat at a desk, reading reports, analyzing spreadsheets, scribbling notes, building financial models by hand, then digitizing them. She even created color-coded graphs by memory, no templates. She moved with ease, precision, and the kind of concentration you only see in people with purpose. Lauren wasn't just smart. She was brilliant, and Nolan had overlooked her for weeks. The next morning, Brian was summoned to Nolan's office. The man who once strutted around the building now shuffled in, visibly nervous. When he saw Nolan's expression, calm but cold, he froze mid-step. "Do you have any idea?" Nolan began slowly. "How your arrogance nearly destroyed this branch?" Brian lowered his eyes. "You fired my top performers, people I handpicked and trained, people who built this office into what it was. And then, on top of that, you tried to pass off someone else's work as your own." Brian stammered, "Sir, please, if I can just explain." But Nolan raised a hand. "I'm not interested in lies. You have 10 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the building." Brian didn't argue. The color drained from his face. He turned and walked out like a man aging 10 years in 10 seconds. And then Nolan made a phone call. "Can you bring Lauren up to my office, please?" When Lauren entered, she looked startled to be summoned. She hesitated at the door, unsure. Nolan offered a kind smile and motioned for her to sit. "I'd like to learn more about you," he said sincerely. "You clearly have a brilliant mind. I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner." Lauren looked down, cheeks flushing. Then, in a soft, slightly hesitant voice, she began to speak. Her words were careful, and her speech was shaped by years of working around her deafness. She glanced occasionally out the window as she told her story, not because she was distracted, but because the memories she summoned weren't easy to face head-on. She had grown up in a poor part of Detroit. Her parents drank heavily, and most nights ended in shouting matches. By the time she was in 3rd grade, Lauren had found her refuge in an abandoned shed 3 blocks from her home. She would sneak out before sunrise, backpack already packed, and walk herself to school. She never missed a day. Despite the chaos at home, she thrived academically. She loved business studies, especially financial modeling. It made sense to her. Numbers were honest, clean, predictable. She excelled, quickly rising to the top of her class. By the time she reached college, Lauren was awarded a scholarship to study business administration at a respected state university. She was known among her peers not just for her intelligence but for her willingness to help others. Her professors adored her. It was during this time she met Connor, tall, confident, and the son of a well-off family from upstate New York. Their connection was instant. Their love was real. But not everyone saw it that way. Connor's family disapproved. They didn't think she was fit for their son. Not because of her hearing loss, but because she didn't come from money. "You can't marry ambition," his mother had once told him coldly. But Connor didn't care. He proposed during their junior year. They were inseparable. One weekend, they visited friends in the countryside. A brief getaway from studies and judgmental stares. The air was crisp, the sky cloudless. It should have been perfect. It was supposed to be the happiest week of their lives. Lauren and Connor were just days away from their wedding. That Saturday, they were driving upstate to visit friends at a lakeside cabin where some of their closest people had gathered for a small celebration. Laughter, music, fresh air. The weekend was meant to be a break from the noise of the world. But nature had other plans. As they turned off the main highway, a dense white fog began to descend. Within minutes, everything vanished into a blinding blur. Visibility dropped to just a few feet. Neither of them saw the oncoming headlights until it was too late. The sound of tires screaming, metal folding in on itself. Then silence. When Lauren regained consciousness, she was already in the back of an ambulance. Her first words were, "Where's Connor?" She blacked out again before anyone could answer. She woke in a hospital room, disoriented and bandaged, only to be met with the devastating truth. Connor was gone. Doctors told her the crash caused no visible damage to her ears, but from that day forward, Lauren could no longer hear. They chalked it up to trauma, a neurological response to extreme grief. Whatever the reason, the silence was permanent. She begged to attend Connor's funeral. She pleaded to visit his grave. But Connor's parents, wealthy, influential, and drowning in grief, refused. They blamed her for everything. "If it weren't for you and your trashy friends," Connor's mother spat through clenched teeth, "he never would have gone to that place. You'll never be anything but a cleaning lady. I swear on his grave, I'll make sure your life becomes a living hell." It wasn't just cruel. It was venomous. And Lauren? She didn't argue. She didn't fight back. She just wished it had been her in that coffin instead of him. From there, her world unraveled. Her mother had abandoned her. Her roommates partied away the little money she had left and accidentally burned down the place they all shared. She lost her home, her job, her health, and now her hearing. Who would hire a deaf girl with no family, no money, and no connections? At first, Lauren survived on sheer willpower. She taught herself to read lips using old library videos. She picked up odd jobs, mostly cleaning bathrooms at gas stations or sweeping stalls at the local flea market. Every dollar she earned went toward buying the cheapest hearing aid she could find. It barely worked, but it helped her catch a few words here and there. She wandered from place to place until she found an abandoned storage shed behind a closed-down car wash. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And though she never complained, nights got harder when winter came. The cold wasn't what bothered her most. It was watching her animals suffer. Her only companions. 2 dogs, 3 cats, and a rescued parrot with a bent wing. She always fed them first, even if she only had crackers and tap water for herself. Despite all that, Lauren stayed kind. She stayed hopeful. She never gave up. And that was the version of her story she shared with Nolan Avery. As she sat quietly in his office, eyes fixed on a spot outside the window, Nolan listened, truly listened. He had known Connor's family. He remembered the funeral. He remembered the whispers. But hearing Lauren's side, seeing the weight she carried with such grace, changed something in him. "Lauren," he said gently, "what would you say if I offered you the branch manager's role?" She looked at him with wide eyes, stunned. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came at first. Then, finally, a quiet, "I would be honored." From that moment forward, everything changed. Lauren took over the branch, and within weeks, performance skyrocketed. Employees respected her quiet strength, her wisdom, and her fairness. The toxic culture Brian left behind faded like a bad dream. Nolan visited often. Sometimes he'd drive her home. Sometimes they stayed late just talking. It didn't take long before rumors began to spread. And soon, the rumors became reality. One crisp October morning, a company-wide email landed in every inbox. Nolan and Lauren were engaged. On a rainy afternoon not long after, Nolan stopped by the office with something in hand, a rolled-up certificate, tied with a gold ribbon. He stepped into her office and smiled. "Hey, sweetheart, I've got something for you." Inside the ribboned bundle? A deed. He had purchased and renovated a small, cozy animal shelter in Lauren's name. All her rescues, her beloved dogs, cats, and even the parrot, had been moved there safe and warm. Full-time staff, heated floors, medical care. She broke down in tears when she saw it. Not out of sadness, out of pure, overwhelming joy. The story didn't end there. Weeks later, Lauren took a test. The kind of test that changes lives. She was pregnant. When she told Nolan, he was speechless. He held her for a long time, and when he finally pulled back, he whispered, "You're my miracle." And then, another miracle. Her hearing came back. Just like that, no explanation, no warning. One morning she woke up to the sound of birds chirping, the rustle of bedsheets, the hum of the fridge. Doctors were baffled. They ran every test imaginable. but there it was, full, restored hearing. Some things science can't explain. Some things just are. Their home, a sprawling but warm house on the edge of a lake, became a place of healing, of second chances, a family. So now I ask you, dear listener, what would you have done in Lauren's place? Would you have survived what she did? Would you have found the strength to keep going? Because Lauren's story isn't just about tragedy. It's about resilience, about choosing hope when everything else tells you to give up. It's about finding love again, in the most unexpected of places, and realizing that even when life steals your voice, your dreams, your light, you can still rise. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get it all back. If this story touched you in any way, please support it. Give it a like, subscribe, and be sure to write in the comments. What would you do if you were Lauren? Do you believe in such miracles? Your words could be an encouragement to someone going through her ordeal right now. Don't pass it by. Together we can do more than we think.